This is Legal View, where we look at the news from a legal point of view.
Welcome to Legal View. I'm Michael Ayala. I wanted to give you a quick rundown of today's closing arguments in the Lindsay Clancy case. Now, Lindsay Clancy's case right now is in the hands of the jury after 21 days of testimony. 85 witnesses took the stand. Jury deliberations began around 12:30 or so. Of course, Lindsay Clancy has pleaded not guilty to first-degree murder charges by reason of insanity. She killed her 5-year-old daughter Cora, her 5-year-old son Dawson, and her 8-month-old Callan. Now, the state claimed that Clancy actually planned these killings. Not only was she sane at the time that she did it, but she planned it. And of course, the defense says she's not criminally responsible because she wasn't able to, because of a mental disease or defect, appreciate the nature of her actions, whether they were right or wrong. In Massachusetts, once the defense shows any kind of evidence at all of mental disabilities or mental issues or mental disease or defect, the burden shifts to the state. It's one of the few states that does that. So they have to prove, the state has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that she was sane and was not suffering from a mental disease or defect. Now, if she is found not guilty, she will be sent home. If she's found not guilty by reason of insanity, she'll be sent to a psychiatric institution for continued evaluation. And once they determine that she's able to re-enter society, she will be let go. If she's found guilty of first-degree murder, she will be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. I will tell you that the judge delivered the charges to the jury, and he added a couple. Second-degree murder, and that's basically with no premeditation. Of course, first-degree murder includes premeditation. Second-degree murder, intent, but no premeditation. So that's basically any murder. It doesn't fall under first-degree murder, falls under second-degree murder. So if they find she didn't particularly have the intent, she can be found guilty of second-degree murder. I don't see that being a viable option here unless it's a compromise verdict, quite frankly, unless folks can't agree. Another opportunity for compromise is with another charge. The defense, Kevin Reddington, asked for a charge on manslaughter. I was surprised he actually won this. He was also asking for a charge on involuntary manslaughter. He didn't get that. Voluntary manslaughter is an intentional killing that lacks malice because it happens under mitigating circumstances. The prosecution must prove the defendant intended to cause injury or death, but that mitigating factors reduce the charge from murder. And the only mitigating factor that would fit under these circumstances is heat of passion upon reasonable provocation, a sudden, intense emotional response to a provoking event that would cause a reasonable person to lose self-control. So I imagine Kevin Reddington is thinking that these auditory hallucinations could be that provoking an intense emotional response from her. Normally, when you think about these things, it usually has to do with the other person provoking you in some way. So I don't know if this will fall into this as far as the jury is concerned. The fact that these auditory hallucinations, that's the only thing I can think of. Certainly, I don't think he's claiming the kids somehow provoked her into this in any way. The jury was given an intoxication instruction. Intoxication means essentially if you are under the influence of some sort of intoxicant, then it can negate certain parts of intent for specific intent crimes like murder. Not general intent like driving drunk, but for murder, if they find that you're intoxicated. And here there's a difference between voluntary and involuntary, but if you were intoxicated, and that could erase the specific intent. And that's important for the defense. Again, Kevin Reddington was pushing for this because we know, at least it was testified to, that she took some pills with lemonade prior to the killings. So if the jury finds she was under the influence of those pills that she crushed up and put in the lemonade, they could possibly find that that would negate the intent aspect of first-degree murder, and could make her eligible for perhaps second-degree murder or even manslaughter. The jury, after the alternates were let go, is made up of 9 women and 3 men. That could be significant in this case. This is certainly one of those cases where we've seen support for Lindsay Clancy amongst women who have suffered from some form of postpartum depression. Many of them have talked to the media, and I've seen many of them say, but for the grace of God go I, because they say you need to have experienced it to truly understand what this disease is really like. So they wanted to bring awareness. A lot of our supporters are out there bringing awareness to postpartum depression. Now, for the state's closing argument, it was delivered by Jennifer Sprague, and I did say earlier I felt they got themselves back in the game. I thought they were losing ground to the defense throughout the trial in a number of ways. A number of their witnesses did do very well on cross-examination, but I thought they were their own worst enemy in many ways. I thought their attitude towards the defendant and towards mental illness in general was problematic. It was almost dismissive. Jurors, I can tell you, do not like that. Postpartum depression, and again, there were a lot of women on this jury. I would imagine the numbers suggest at least 1 or 2 of them have dealt with this, if not more. I don't know. I wasn't there for voir dire, but I promise you they know someone who's dealt with it. So to be totally dismissive of it, and mental illness in general, I thought was problematic. There were some attitude issues, I thought, with the state during the trial, but I thought they struck the right tone. They did a little bit of a 180 in their closing, agreeing that she had some form of mental disease going on, but not at the time of the murders. And that she, in fact, did want to commit suicide. Originally, they had said that she didn't. It was all fake. It was a fake attempt to commit suicide. They've kind of come around on that, saying that suicide was the main plan and that killing the kids was because she could no longer take care of them. So again, I don't know what effect that'll have on the jury. But anyway, they said that she premeditated this act. She started planning around 4 p.m., how long the trip would take, that she was sending Pat on to go get the food and the medication at CVS. And she killed the kids as soon as he left because she knew that her time was short. This is a point of dispute because the defense says it happened after he called from the CVS a little bit later. Why is this important? Because the prosecution goes on to mention in their closing argument that how could she have rational thought after the killing of the kids if she was in the throes of this auditory hallucination and acting as a puppet based on the voice in her head, if she was able to kill the kids right after he left, miss a call, see that she missed a call, go into the call him back. That's not the act of someone who is within the throes of being a puppet to auditory hallucinations. They also claim that the nature of the murders don't fit with the nature of auditory hallucinations. Again, if she's under the control of a voice that's telling her to do things, she was very methodical with the killings, very rational. She killed the oldest one, then the second oldest, then the youngest. And they say those choices show she knew exactly what she was doing. She took them and led them to where she was going to kill them. Rational choices. They also claim that the manic nature in which one would normally act under auditory hallucinations wasn't here. 3 different ways she tried to kill herself. Couldn't get, one couldn't get right, couldn't get the second one right, then jumped out of a window. Like, that's not how this happens. If you're under orders from a voice to kill the children, jump out of a window, then you just do it. You get it done. The fact that she could think about, well, this isn't working, let me try something else. This isn't working, let me try something else, suggests that she wasn't under the command of these auditory voices and knew exactly what she was doing. The problems they cite with the psychosis defense: she saw a doctor the day before the killings, no signs of psychosis. Their expert, who has a plus and a minus. He saw her 3 years after the event, so that would be a minus. But he's also the top doctor in the field who has treated thousands of patients with psychosis and many with auditory hallucinations. And he said it is extremely uncommon, rare, for someone to have auditory hallucinations just once. No real record of it before, no record after. You don't need to have seen her right after the event to make that determination. This is recorded, documented. And so that particular conclusion I find to be very strong. Now, we had a number of experts, 4 experts, 5 experts total. They all sort of came up with different diagnoses. So I don't know how the jury is going to interpret that. I mean, they all seem to fall somewhere in the bipolar 2 depression range, but they all had different, the key difference being that the state's experts felt that there wasn't any psychosis or auditory hallucinations, whereas the defense's doctors felt that there were. The advantage of the defense's doctor, particularly Dr. Zeisel, was that he's been treating her since just about after the event. So he would have the clearest and longest picture of her treatment. And he was very clear that he thought she was suffering from psychosis and she continues to be extremely mentally ill. Now, Kevin Reddington, he basically said, look, it's clear we've documented for you that she's been suffering and had been suffering from a mental disease or defect throughout this time. So he reached out to many, many doctors. I think what's important to note is that he feels that she was let down by the system. And he specifically named Dr. Jennifer Tufts, a doctor she went to see, who really had little experience. I think it was just a couple of months. And she was prescribed medications that started causing her problems. And that's when all of this started. It was when she started taking medications, went to see other doctors, got different medications, causing problems, became this toxic mix that triggered these problems that led to her killing her children as a result of a mental disease or defect. What was interesting in the state's closing argument, they were very clear that this wasn't about the medical system. She wasn't let down by any system. That she wanted to get better. She had a mental disease or problem, but depression and things of that nature, perhaps postpartum. But she wanted to get better on her terms. She did a lot of doctor jumping. She would take her medication sometimes she wouldn't. And she wanted to get better on her own terms and had access to plenty of care. She had more access than most women have when they're suffering with this type of thing. So this claim that the system let them down is not really viable as far as the state is concerned. And I thought that was important to point out, because I think if you are a juror and you want somebody to blame for this crime, which often when you have innocent little victims like children, that's what you want. The defense needs to hold somebody up for them to blame if they don't want them to blame their client. And what Reddington did throughout the case and throughout his closing argument was talk about how the system let the family down. And I thought the state did a good job of counteracting that, saying, look, this wasn't about the system letting her down. She had plenty of care. So many doctors, but she wanted this to be on her terms. And finally, he says, but it was very important that Lindsay Clancy from the very beginning never ran from anything. She has taken responsibility for killing these kids. She never ran from this. She was very clear about her responsibility for all of this. And she was, in fact, very emotional throughout the trial. Anytime the kids were mentioned, even during the charging instructions, when the judge was explaining first-degree murder and connecting that to what happened here in this case, she was very, very emotional. So there you have it. Those were the closing arguments as we saw them. I do want to outline the final words of the prosecutor, which I thought were very poignant. And again, like I said, I thought they really redeemed themselves, Jennifer Sprague, with these closing arguments. She said, Lindsay Clancy discarded the children on the basement floor like broken toys because she was done playing the game. All right. So the jury will be deliberating. This could be a long deliberation. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a hung jury. This is a very difficult one. It could really go either way. But I think when you look at the burden on the state to prove that she was in her right mind and could understand the nature of her actions when killing these children, may be the one hurdle they can't get over. And this jury might find her not guilty, but certainly by reason of insanity. All right, I'm Michael Ayala. We'll be coming to you a little bit later. I have an interview with Grace Wong. She is in the courtroom, has been in the courtroom. She's going to tell us about how the jury took in these closing arguments, what it was like in the courtroom. Lindsay's family was there. It was a packed courtroom. So we'll have that report for you later in the day. Once again, thank you so much for joining Legal View. I'm Michael Ayala.
Legal View, where we view the news through the lens of the law.